It's 3 a.m. The room is dark. You've been lying here for 40 minutes, completely still, staring at a ceiling you can't even see. And then it starts. A conversation from 3 years ago. Something you said at the wrong moment. The look on someone's face right after. Or maybe it's bigger, a decision you made, a door you closed, a version of your life that doesn't exist anymore. You're fine during the day. You function. You get through meetings and errands and conversations without falling apart. But at 3 a.m. something shifts. The thoughts come sharper. The regrets feel heavier. The questions you pushed away all day. Am I doing enough? Do people actually like me? Did I make the right choice? They come back with a weight that feels almost physical. And the worst part isn't the thoughts themselves. It's that they feel true. More true than anything you thought at 2 in the afternoon. Like 3 a.m. is the only hour your brain finally stops lying to you. This is the psychology behind why the dark makes everything louder. Not because you're broken, not because your fears are accurate, but because something specific is happening in your brain at that hour. Something that makes thoughts feel more real than they actually are. And once you understand what's happening, you'll never be ambushed by it the same way again. Here's what nobody tells you about 3 a.m. thoughts. The intensity is not the truth. It feels like truth. It arrives with the full weight of certainty. The relationship is falling apart. You made the wrong call. You've wasted years. The feeling is so specific, so vivid, that it seems like it must be accurate. Like your brain stripped away the daylight's comfortable lies and finally showed you something real. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is older than that. And it started long before you were old enough to lie awake worrying about. When you were a child, you learned something about when it was safe to feel things. Not as a lesson anyone taught you, as something your nervous system figured out on its own, quietly, over years. Maybe you grew up in a house where emotions were inconvenient, where a parent's mood set the temperature of every room before you walked into it, where keeping it together wasn't a preference, it was a survival strategy. You learned to read faces before you spoke, to time your needs around someone else's capacity, to hold things in during the hours when holding them in was required, and at night, when the house was quiet and no one was watching, you let yourself feel what the day hadn't had room for. You got very good at that, at processing in private, at not bringing things into the light until you were absolutely sure it was safe, and deciding most of the time that it wasn't. The feelings didn't disappear. They just learned to wait, to surface in the small hours in the dark, when the only person who could witness them was you. The nervous system doesn't forget where it learned it was allowed to feel. Decades later, long after the original environment is gone, a different home, a different life, relationships that are actually safe, the pattern runs the same route. Unprocessed emotional content from the day waits for the window your nervous system still trusts. The window is dark. It's 3 a.m., and without quite knowing why, it feels exactly like home. Research on rumination published in the journal Dreaming found that people who experienced emotional neglect in childhood were significantly more likely to engage in nighttime rumination as adults, not because they chose to lie awake, but because the nervous system had learned at a very early age that nighttime was the only hour available for that kind of honesty. But that's only part of the story. Here's the part that changes everything. The reason 3 a.m. thoughts feel so true has nothing to do with their accuracy. It has everything to do with which part of your brain is running the show. During the day, you have a gatekeeper, the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for perspective, proportion, emotional regulation, stays engaged with the immediate world. When a worry surfaces, it runs through that filter. The filter says, this is a problem, but it's solvable. This is uncomfortable, but it's not catastrophic. You've handled this before. You can handle it again. At 3 a.m., that filter goes quiet. In 2024, Dr. Scott Kearney and his team at the University of York studied what happens to memory and thought suppression when the brain is sleep-deprived. They took 85 volunteers, some allowed to sleep normally, others kept awake, and then asked both groups to suppress specific memories. The difference was immediate. People who had slept engaged the region of the brain responsible for inhibiting unwanted thoughts. The memories stayed pushed away. The sleep-deprived group couldn't do it. The suppression mechanism had weakened. The memories kept surfacing, not because the participants were choosing to dwell, but because the neural door that keeps certain thoughts out was no longer functioning properly. What this means for 3 a.m. is this. When you wake in the night, right in the window when your brain is most actively processing emotional memory, the filter is down. The amygdala, which processes threat and emotional weight, runs without the prefrontal cortex keeping it in proportion. Every unresolved feeling becomes available at once. Every memory that carries emotional charge surfaces simultaneously. It's like walking into a room where someone pulled all the files out of the cabinets at once and left them spread across the floor. The thought feels urgent because the part of your brain that would tell you it isn't urgent is offline. 3 a.m. isn't deeper, it's less filtered, and less filtered doesn't mean more true. It means more raw, more loud, more certain feeling, without any of the perspective that would let you evaluate whether that certainty is earned. That conversation from 3 years ago that feels, at 3 a.m., like the defining proof that you always say the wrong thing. Your prefrontal cortex, if it were awake, would remind you of the 100 conversations that went fine, the decision that feels like a catastrophic mistake at 3 a.m. The filter would weigh it against everything else you know, the context, the information you had at the time, the fact that most decisions made under imperfect conditions turn out to be survivable. The fear that nobody actually likes you, that the relationships in your life are thinner than they appear. The gatekeeper would surface the actual evidence, the person who texted to check on you, the dinner that ran 3 hours longer than anyone planned, the friend who said the thing at exactly the right moment. At 3 a.m., none of that evidence is available, only the feeling, and the feeling is enormous. Intensity is not truth. It's just intensity without a moderator. They call it overthinking, as if the problem is volume, that your brain is simply working too hard, caring too much, refusing to let things go. They say, just stop, put the phone down, stop giving it energy, write it in a journal. Try a breathing exercise. Decide deliberately to think about something else, as if the thought is the problem and not the unfinished thing underneath it. As if the thought showed up for no reason, chose you arbitrarily, and could be dismissed the same way you'd close a tab. Your brain isn't overthinking. It's trying to complete something. The amygdala doesn't know it's 3 a.m. It doesn't know you have to be awake in 4 hours, that the alarm is already set, that tomorrow will be harder for this. It knows there are unresolved emotional threads, things that happen that haven't been given meaning yet. Losses that haven't been named, versions of yourself you haven't grieved, and it keeps returning to them because it's looking for the ending. You call it anxiety. Your brain calls it unfinished work. The thoughts that find you in the dark are the ones that carry genuine emotional weight. They surface the relationships, the choices, the questions that your daylight self was too busy to hold. That they arrive distorted, louder than they should be, heavier than the evidence warrants, is a feature of the hour, not a feature of the truth. The fact that you feel them at all, that you lie awake at 3 a.m., caring about someone who may not even remember the moment, replaying a decision, because part of you still wants to get it right, that isn't a malfunction. That's a brain that hasn't given up on understanding its own life. At 3 a.m., the world offers you nothing to hide behind. No noise, no tasks, no version of yourself you're performing for anyone. Just the unfinished parts, the grief that didn't fit into the day, the questions that don't have clean answers, the love that outlasted the relationship it lived inside. The thoughts feel true because nothing is softening them. But feeling true and being true are two different things, and 3 a.m. doesn't know the difference. It only knows that the filter is down and the feelings are loud. What it knows is that you're still here, still turning things over, still caring enough to lose sleep over them. That's not weakness. That's just what it looks like to be someone who takes their own life seriously.